Hello, English 132. We're back. As you know from my email the other day, we had a death in the family, and so I got a little behind um, in our work, but now I'm ready to get back to it. Our next project is the research paper, so we're going to pick up with that. We're doing that before the spring break. Um, And I want to begin by pointing out that on Moodle, I posted an article that I'd like you to read. It's called "Why We Believe Obvious Untruths," and it ties in with what I want to talk about in this video here, which is to kind of take a philosophical look at what we mean by such things as truth and facts and belief and opinion and so forth. How do we know anything? Right? We're going to be writing a research paper, and it's important to come to kind of an adult awareness of where knowledge comes from, what it means to know something. And you might remember that we talked earlier in the semester about the term information literacy, which is not a term I made up. I don't really like it, but what it means is the ability to, or I guess skill with knowing how to find and use information properly. Right? Literacy means the ability to read and write, but it gets used for other things like people talk about mathematical literacy or computer literacy. It just means skills in those particular areas. Information literacy is about, as I said, it's the skill of knowing when you need information, knowing how to find it, recognizing good information, and knowing how to use it, all those kinds of things, right? So before we delve into the practical parts of it, I want to begin by thinking about some words and maybe make you less certain about things than you are right now. Okay, so here's some words. Information. The word information. What does information mean? Um, well, it's sort of a scientific or neutral term. Information. Um, what is a fact? What is the truth? Right, I've got three different words there. Let's think about that. What do we mean by something being? Oh, this reminds me. Before we go into that, I've got a copy of the syllabus here. Your research paper was due on the 17th of April, but as you know, everything was pushed ahead a week. So now it'll be due on the 24th, and that's the rough draft. And then you'll get it back with comments, and you'll have a week to revise it. Before that happens, though, you're going to meet with me individually for conferences. Those were going to be conferences in my office, but instead there'll be conferences over the phone to discuss your research paper. And those will happen either next Friday or the following Monday. Right? They were originally scheduled for the 17th Friday or the 20th Monday, but I'm sorry, they were originally scheduled for the 13th or the 15th, but now they will be on the 20th or the 22nd, the 17th or the 20th. Look at your syllabus, add 7 to the dates, and you'll see what it is. Friday the 17th and Monday the 20th, you'll be meeting with me for conferences. What I want you to have by that date is an outline for your research paper. That's the perfect stage to be at that time. When I meet with students for conferences, I want to be able to see what their plans are before they actually launch into the writing of the paper, because once you've written something down, it's a lot harder to make yourself change it. So by the 17th, or the 20th. I'd like you to have a reasonably detailed outline for your paper so we can see where it's going, and we can kind of uh, launch into a week of essay writing that will produce your rough draft. All right, so as I was saying, what does it mean for something to be a fact? Well, is there a difference between a fact and the truth? If so, why do we have two different words? Um, how do we know if something is true or not? How do we know if something's a fact? Well, if we look up the definitions of these words in the dictionary, which I did the other day, information is knowledge derived from study, experience, or instruction. So information is knowledge that's acquired from somewhere, right? Whereas a fact is knowledge or information based on real occurrences. This is anyway how the American Heritage Dictionary defines these words. And then what does it mean for something to be true? Well, something is true if it's proven or accepted as true. That sounds as though something's true if most people believe it is, if they accept that it's true. The second definition of truth is conformity to actuality. So in other words, there's how things actually are, and the truth is some kind of statement or claim that fits actuality. Where am I going with all this? Well, how do we know if something is true or not? I'm holding up two fingers. Is that true? How do you know? Maybe my other hand, I'm holding up another finger. Well, or maybe by the time you see this, I will not be holding up any fingers. You can always question everything that you're perceiving, and find room for doubt about it. Everything that you claim to know, it's not too hard to begin to question it. Let's say 500 years ago, people thought that the earth was flat, and they would have said, they can prove it because, for one thing, everybody knows and everybody agrees that the world is flat. Actually, we have to go back farther than 500 years, don't we? Before time of Columbus and so forth. Let's go back 1,000 years. And you can prove that the world is flat because you can just observe it. And you put a ball on the ground and it doesn't roll away; it stays there. And of course, the world is flat because it wouldn't make sense if it was any other shape. If it was round, then you'd walk to the edge of it and you'd fall off. So all those things seem like proof, right? That how do they define proof here? To prove something is to establish the truth of something by presentation of argument or evidence, right? So you can prove it by showing evidence, and they did have evidence for that. But of course, the Earth is not flat. 1,000 years ago, that would have been considered a fact. We now know that it's not actually true. But was it still a fact? If the widespread consensus or belief in society is that something is true, and it's widely accepted as a fact, is it a fact? Well, depends on how you define fact, right? Things that we now know to be factual, if you drop something, it will fall at the rate of 32 feet per second squared, right? That's something that's been proven through observation, and we know it to be true. But of course, it's possible that in the future, um, things that we now know or believe we know um, will be disproven. Um, to take things to another level, if I were teaching this in a classroom, I could ask you whether um, what I could ask you the color of your car, and you could tell me, um, and you would believe it with certainty. You would think that it's a fact, and we could go out and examine your car and see what the color of it is. Um, and is there any way that that might not be true? Well, it's possible that somebody spray painted your car while you're in class. Um, it's not likely, but it's possible. It's possible that somehow you completely forgot the color of your car and you were mistaken, or it's possible that you're colorblind, um, etc. Um, so then, the next step is I ask students, about something that they can absolutely be sure of, like their teacher is standing in front of them in the classroom, and they can agree to that. Yes, that is true. We know that to be true because we're watching it in real time, and something that you're not actually directly observing, you never know whether it's true. Donald Trump is the president. Is that true? Probably, but we could turn on our phones and find out that he just died, and Mike Pence is now the president. Um, or, yeah, to come back to the example, um, your teacher is standing in front of you in the classroom. Um, you are breathing right now. Uh, facts like that seem like they couldn't possibly be false. Well, isn't it possible that that this is a dream, and you wake up and you find out that it wasn't true? Or there's a philosopher from 500 years ago, 400 years ago, named Rene Descartes, who has a famous um, phrase here, sentence. I think, therefore I am. And he made it that short so it would fit on my blue board here. All right. I think, therefore I am. Maybe you've heard that before. Um, it's a famous it's a famous statement because what Descartes was trying to do as a philosopher was to try to figure out what is it that we actually know for certain. Everything can be doubted. Everything could be an illusion. He said that it might be that my body and the world don't exist, that I'm just a mind floating in space, and God is projecting all these illusions on me and make me think that I'm flesh and blood living on Earth. Um, it's possible. There's no way for us to know for sure, right? His goal, Rene Descartes, was to find out what's absolutely sort of undeniably true, because if we want to, understand the world, we want to build it on the basis of things that we know to be true, not just things that we happen to believe. Um, his thinking is important in the history of science because um, scientists, the scientists based their method in part on Descartes' thinking. Um, in order for something to be um, known to be true, scientists, um, the scientific method requires that it be observed with the five senses, and that um, if somebody determine something to be true, other people can also witness it and verify that it's true, right? I'm going into this because in academia, in college and higher education, um, the understanding of knowledge is heavily influenced by science. Um, Things are known because they have been studied and carefully recorded and verified by other people and so forth. There are other ways that in other times and other situations people have um, claimed to know something. Knowledge could be based on tradition, right? Something that's just been passed down, and I believe it because my parents believed it and their parents before them, and it's just tradition, right? It could be that I know something of because it was told to me by some authority, right? Some person whose authority I believe in, and I could make that the basis of my worldview. Whatever the authorities tell me, I accept. Or it could be based on revelation. Um, Religious beliefs are not based on observation of the five senses, they're based on what they call revelation. Either God or people who have access to God um, report what's true and what's false. Um, Intuition is another thing. Sometimes people say, "Well, I just I know it in my heart or in my gut that it's true." Right? But scientists don't accept any of those things. Something, in order to be taken as true by a scientist, needs to be observed with the senses, as I said, and then somebody else is able to verify it. Um, and um, the value of that is that um, bit by bit we can identify things that we all kind of agree are factually true, and then we build a view of the world that's very likely to be true. So it's a view that is sometimes wrong, right? We discover that scientists made an error, but then they correct that error, and their model of what's true is slightly closer to the truth. Then, little by little, the theory would be we can figure out the whole world, the whole universe. Right? The thing I sent you, or a thing I posted rather on Moodle, the article called "Why We Believe Obvious Untruths," talks about how knowledge is not in your head. Very little knowledge is in your head. Most of what we claim to know is known by other members of our species, right? Um, we all claim to know that the world is round and not flat, but can you prove that? I can't prove it. Um, I could maybe prove it if I devoted my life to figuring out how to prove it, you know, mathematically or based on, how do you prove that? You can get in an airplane and fly around the world. That doesn't really prove anything. You got in an airplane and you saw a bunch of land and then you got out of the airplane. How do you know that you went in a circle? Um, it's hard to prove, right? But members of our species know it. And that's true of all kinds of things that we claim to know. Um, our species has little by little collected information or knowledge, and we store it in our brains and on pieces of paper and so forth, written down. Um, and then, what are you doing in college? You're picking up knowledge. You're learning new things from people that hopefully you trust, right? And they're supposed to be responsible, and they're supposed to pass along to you things that are worth believing. Um, and so, most of what we claim to know, we're really talking about things that we've heard other people report, and we believe them, right? So it's important to know who to trust and who not to, because there's a lot of information in the world, and it's easy to fill your mind with untruths, as the article calls them, things that aren't true. Um, you always have to consider the source of information um, to know whether it's trustworthy or not. How do you know if something is trustworthy? Well, who is it that's telling you, right? Who is the person that's telling you that? Can that person be trusted? Are they smart enough and honest enough and knowledgeable enough and so forth? Or if it's not a person, is there an organization or institution that is presenting this to you? If so, the reputation of that person or that institution will be the basis of your believing it, right? And a reputation is something that's built up over time, little by little. Um, People have to kind of observe that person or that organization as they, go through time and see that that person, in fact, can be trusted, or that organization can be trusted. Um, so, what does this have to do with the research paper? Well, we're going to be launching into research. We're going to be writing papers on things that um, are complicated issues, and you want your research paper to be based on um, the surest knowledge that you can find. If you're writing about Wikipedia or about conspiracy theories or happiness, these are things that you probably have only vague ideas about, but you'll read stuff written by people who have looked much further into it, and they have some expertise, people who've spent their careers focusing on a particular issue, and so they know that field pretty well. Happiness. What is it that makes people happy? Well, if you research it, you'll see that different experts explain it differently, and it's not the case that one of them is right and the rest of them are wrong. They all are explaining something complicated from a particular viewpoint, um, based on their expertise, their years of experience. They can be wrong, right? Experts can be wrong, but um, that's the thing. Again, coming back to, oh, Rene Descartes. I think, therefore I am. This is what he meant by this. He said, as I said, this could all just be a dream. All I know is, that I could be floating in space and maybe God is projecting ideas and feelings onto me. But there is one thing that I know, and that's that I exist because I am thinking, right? If I am thinking, therefore I am, I exist, right? So he said, that's the only thing you can know for sure. Everything else is uncertain, right? But of course, we can't live in a world like that. Um, so we have to accept certain things as true, and um, um, there's lots of information that is contradictory out in the world, and we live in what they call the information age. The world is flooded with information now because of the internet, um, and you'd think that that would make research and study easier, but it's in fact made it harder because we're flooded with so much information that it's hard to find the good information. It's kind of drowning in a sea of hogwash, to use an old-fashioned term. So again, to come back to the example of happiness, if somebody spends their career studying happiness, well, then their explanation of it is likely to be more sophisticated, based on, more thoroughly thought through. It's just more likely to be accurate. Um, and when we're talking about facts and the truth and so forth, and we want to separate facts from opinions, um, well, a lot of things um, don't exist in the form of a fact. What makes people happy? Again, we'll go to that example. Well, there isn't sort of a simple fact about that. There's all kinds of ways to explain it. And so ultimately, we can't go to somebody and ask for facts, but we have to ask for their expert opinion. And there's nothing wrong with expert opinion, because in this human world, that's the best we have. Right? You find somebody who has expertise, and if they know more than you about the subject, then it's smart um, to accept their views of things. Of course, as a researcher, you can consult more than just that one person, and you can see how different people have explained something, and then you sort it out for yourself and try to see how all the different perspectives fit together. All right. I'm rambling a little bit here. Let me then talk about credibility. Where's my eraser here? Credibility. There it is. Credibility. What do we mean by credibility? Believability. The word cred here, like street cred, it means that you're somebody that is trusted or believed. Or the word credo, or in a religious context, people talk about a creed. It's a statement of belief. So this has to do with belief, right? Believability. When something is incredible, that means you can't believe it, right? It's beyond belief. So to establish credibility, you have to know whether you have some kind of source, right? The source can be a person or an organization, but let's say that it's a person, right? In order to know whether that person can be trusted, you have to know the person's credentials, right? You can't just say, "Oh, well, um, I've proven this is true because John Smith wrote it." Who is John Smith? We don't know who that is. We have to know what the person's credentials are, right? Sorry, that example probably didn't make sense. We're going to do an exercise in about a week, and I'll explain what I meant then. So, credentials. What do you mean by credentials? See that root word again. It has to do with believability. Credentials are evidence of expertise. Hey, that's a good definition. Evidence of expertise. Right? And the evidence of expertise can be somebody's degree, their education. And if we're talking about somebody's education, well, um, what kind of education? Or, what kind of degree, in other words? Um, is it in, which field is it in, and how advanced is it, right? Um, it needs to be in the proper field, and it needs to be um, you know, um, a higher education, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD, something, the more advanced it is, the more supposedly trustworthy the person is. Right? So I'm making a mess of it here, but the person's education or their degree, um, and also their experience. And usually, what we mean by experience is their professional experience, right? Because you learn something when you go to college, and then usually you end up working as a professional, and you learn more and you learn more and you learn more from your many days of working in that field. And after 20 years, you have a lot more expertise. So evidence of somebody's professional experience, you want to know, what their profession is. You want to know how long they've worked in that field, right? And who they work for. Why would that matter? Well, if you work for a really prestigious place, then again, it's one of your credentials. Um, we may not know who John Smith is, but if we find out that he teaches at Yale, oh, well, we know about Yale, so we can trust Yale because it's got this long history. Um, Other members of our species know that Yale is a good school, to come back to that idea. But then, why does that mean I can trust John Smith? Well, if he got a degree from Yale, that means that um, all those smart, educated people at Yale watched him for several years while he did his academic work, and in the end gave him a degree. So, yeah. So, um, part of a person's credentials is who they work for, the school they went to, um, and have they published things, right? That often when you're talking about a research paper, you're talking about the credentials of a writer, right? Who is the person that's telling me this in this book or this article? What else have they published? Well, that's part of their credentials, right? If they've written things that have been well respected and they've written things that have been published in important newspapers and magazines, that's good for their credibility. All right. So let me look at my notes and see what else I need to tell you. Oh, yeah. Some other ideas that I would like to discuss here is are um, we talk about where do our ideas come from. I think that was the title of the class on the calendar that I had. Um, where do our ideas come from? Well, as that article that you're going to read points out, our ideas come from other people, right? We're born into the world, and other people educate us and tell us things, and we pick up this knowledge. And then once we've gained this knowledge, then they become ours, right? The ideas become ours, our beliefs. And I think what happens is that, something, once you've taken in an idea, and you build up a set of ideas in your head, um, it becomes tangled up with your identity, right? Because it's what I believe. And once I believe something, if somebody attacks my ideas and says, no, those are wrong, then I take that as an attack on my identity. Hey, that person's saying that I am wrong. Um, so we defend our ideas, um, whether or not, I mean, we all are prone to this, right? We don't have to, but we defend our ideas not because they are not because we are absolutely convinced that they're correct, but because it's a battle about our dignity and who we are and so forth. We don't want to be shown to be wrong. But I would say there are two. There's this term that I made up. Oops. This term I made up. Idea warriors versus scientists. Um, this is sort of two different groups with two different ways of handling information. Um, the idea warrior is the person I was just talking about a minute ago. Um, Once you've accepted an idea as your own, then um, you want to defend it and prove it, um, and go on the warpath, right? You want to defeat other people with your ideas. You want your ideas to win. And you can see that there's a lot of that in the world. Um, and, you know, people get in all kinds of battles with their ideas, and their goal is not to discover what's true, but to just assert what's true, right? I already know what's true, and I'm going to tell you, right? That's not that's not seeking the truth. That's seeking domination. The goal here for the idea warrior is victory. Um, doesn't mean their ideas are correct. It just means that they want to win, right? Scientists, on the other hand, are trained not to get their identities tied up in what they believe. Right? If a scientist makes some, if I were a scientist and I made some discovery that made me famous, brought me a lot of money and so forth, a lot of honors and awards, I'd really be into that probably. And then if somebody came along and disproved my theories, um, as a person, I would be disappointed and I would not want it to be true. But as a scientist, I would have to say, well, this person has demonstrated that I was wrong and that this other set of facts is in fact correct. So as a scientist, I applaud that person. I'm happy that now we know the truth more accurately, right? And the scientist's approach to the truth. I have this written on your assignment sheet for the research paper. A scientist is skeptical. Skeptical. To be skeptical means, I can't really read that very well. To be skeptical means hesitant to accept something, right? It doesn't mean that you reject everything. It just means that you don't accept something as true without proof. Scientists are skeptical. They resist taking information into their head until the information is proven or supported by ample evidence. At the same time that they're skeptical, scientists are also very curious, right? Those two things go in different directions. Skeptical, if you're skeptical, you're holding back on letting information in. You're resisting information. If you're curious, you're out seeking information, right? And that's the attitude that I would also add into this. Humble, right? A scientist should be humble. Well, I don't know anything. um, until, scientists are actually very hesitant to declare what's true, right? Like with um, climate change, if you ask somebody who works for Exxon Mobil um, if climate change is real, they might say, no, it's a hoax, and we know it's a hoax. And then you ask a scientist, is it real? They'll say, well, there's always some doubt, but our best evidence shows, and they'll be very careful not to claim absolute knowledge because scientists understand we're doing the best we can. We don't really know everything. Um, my friends are texting me. That's not good. Sorry. Um, um, Scientists, um, you know, their humility keeps them from claiming that they absolutely know something because they always want to keep that little bit of skepticism because even though we actually human beings through science have figured out an awful lot about the world, um, a good scientist always recognizes that mm, maybe if we look a little further into it, we'll discover that what we thought before is not really true. All right. So, in somebody with a college education um, tends to have or ought to have that kind of scientist's attitude about knowledge. That we have an awful lot of knowledge and we have pretty high confidence in a lot of it, but we're always working on it. We're always going to be discovering some things we're not quite what we thought, and we'll you know modify our views as we go. But ultimately, the altogether we're trying to put together an ever more accurate understanding of the world around us. All right, one more thing. Um, when you're writing a research paper, um, we can imagine kind of a scale here. When we're kids and we're told to do a research paper, we go out into the library or into the world and we find out what the adults say, right? We look for facts. We look for, find sources where we can get information. And, when we're kids, we're really just followers, right? We want to go to the adults and we think the adults are the ones who know, right? We'll go and get the facts from the adults and put it in our paper, right? How do I know what the facts are? Well, they'll be written down because the adults have written it down. And then my paper will be true. But once you're an adult and you have a college degree, then you are actually, you become the expert. And as you discover when you grow up and you become an adult, um, experts are uncertain about what they know, right? I think I'm probably confusing you a little bit, but um, let me back up and explain it this way. Um, when you're a kid, you think you can go to the adults and get facts and the truth, and it's just sort of things are simple; they're either true or untrue. As an adult, you understand that you're doing a research paper. You're not going to the adults to tell you what's what. You are one of the adults. You're the other people, the experts who are writing things down and publishing them are other human beings who are trying to figure out the truth, um, and trying to produce their own contribution to our knowledge. And um, um, so as a college student, you should not think of the research paper as I'm going out and acquiring facts. Instead, you're going out and looking into these different topics to see what a lot of experts think, and there may be some disagreement between them. Um, and you're going to do your best in sorting out what seems most likely true from what your sources say. All right, I feel like that last little bit I might have just confused you a little, but I guess I'm thinking about papers that I've seen in the past, and papers that seem like they're you know just they've gone out and acquired some facts that they haven't really thought about and are kind of placing them in the paper. Um, that's kind of weak research. Better research is that which you can tell the student went out and read things, took in the information and processed it and made their own sense of it somehow. All right, that was nearly a 52-minute session, just like a real classroom. Um, so these YouTube videos are strange because I'm used to back and forth conversation, and it um, I hope it works okay to be just unloading information at you like this. Um, so I'm going to put together another couple of YouTube videos, um, probably even tonight. I'll work on that. But if not tonight, then tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning. Um, and what we'll be talking about is electronic databases and internet sources. So see you then.